right. Well, guys, today we're going to be talking about how do you deal with insecurity. But before we start, I just want to stop and say thank you so much for those of you that have been intentionally asking questions, challenging me, and being part of the conversation. I've had some really good conversations with some of you. Actually, with my first video that I ever posted, which was a sort of a video that I had wanted to post for years, or maybe I just never saw it posted, and so I thought I would share my experience. Now, really, that video is not much about the channel at all. It's actually just a conversation about how a ministry school that I was attending and a church that I was a part of was highly criticized by so many people theologically, and I just actually wanted to address those and talk about it. So anyways, I talked about that, and I've actually had some really good feedback from some of you. Some of you, well, yeah, some of you are a little mean, but I'm sure those people are not really part of the community, but thank you. I want to say thank you. And it really is just beautiful to see that happening for us to have this conversation. So, but anyways, today I want to talk about how do you deal with your insecurities? How do you deal with not feeling like you measure up? What if you fail? How do you actually handle that in a healthy way? I believe that if you don't handle this the right way, if you don't know how to handle your failures or your insecurities, it could lead you the wrong direction. You could walk away from what God is calling you to do because you don't feel ready or worthy or whatever have you. And I just want to encourage you wherever you're at, that if you ever feel like that, really how to actually just get back to the Lord and refocus. So with that, I want to talk about Peter's life and how he really experienced this, and we get to see the narrative of his life and how that is really impactful. Now, if you haven't been here, my name is Shane, and I am just passionate about spiritual formation. How do we grow to become more like Jesus? And if you want to be part of a community that's really focused on that really analyzes the Bible, what God is doing, and is passionate to see his kingdom come around us, then I want to encourage you to be part of that, to subscribe. But today, let's talk about Peter, right? So Peter was a fisherman. And what's interesting about how Jesus called the disciples is that Jesus was a rabbi, and rabbis would traditionally have a system where people who went through all of the Jewish training in schools and eventually were very lucky to be able to get selected into the higher levels of learning would eventually they would actually pursue rabbis. And the rabbi would then basically drill them with questions. And then if you were so lucky, the rabbi would pick you. And the rabbi would say, "Follow me." So it was based on your merit. Now, Peter was a fisherman, and the disciples, none of them actually were qualified for this. None of them actually got to that place. All of them wind up taking the trades of whatever, and whether either they were doctors or tax collector, or we don't know, or in the case of Peter, fisherman, right? But Peter was not qualified, and yet Jesus came to him and said, "Follow me." And it was not on the basis of what Peter did. And Peter, you can see that demonstrated in the Gospels when it says that the people took note that these were just ordinary, unschooled men, but they had been with Jesus. And they could see something different in their lives, the fruit of true wisdom, not just based off of their qualifications, but based on the fact that they decided to follow Jesus. And Jesus's plan was to actually spend 3 years with them, day to day. And through his life, they would learn from him. They would learn his ways, his teaching. They would take his yoke upon themselves, his teaching, his way of life. And they would become like him. But Peter wasn't perfect, and I'm sure none of us have perfectly lived out the walk with Jesus every time. But one of the things that's interesting is that at some point, Jesus says, "Who do people say that I am?" And Peter responds, "Some say you are Elijah that is to come. Some say you are this or that." And Jesus says, "Who do you say that I am?" Peter answers correctly. He says, "You are the Messiah." And Jesus says, "Flesh has not revealed this to you, but my Father in heaven." And then right after, Jesus actually gives a revelation of what is to come. What does it really mean to be the Messiah? Jesus talks about how he is about to suffer and die. And Peter rebukes Jesus for that. And you probably know the story, but Jesus is like, get behind me, Satan, for your thoughts are the things of man. So in one moment, Peter is like, man, Peter, you're doing great. And then the other moment, he's totally just missed it. But what's interesting is that at the end of Jesus' life, when Jesus is being put on trial, Jesus knows that Peter is going to deny having been with him. When Peter was asked by people, Peter again and again said, I do not know this man. He denied having been Jesus' disciple. And in the greatest moment of where you would actually say, you know what, you should you should affirm the identity of the Son of God, he cracked. And this isn't just a light matter. Jesus said, if you're ashamed of the Son of Man, then my Father will be ashamed of you. So he talks about that, and yet in this moment, Peter denies. He's afraid. He's scared, and it's a tragic moment. But what's interesting, and what I want to encourage you with, is actually how Jesus responds after his resurrection. He comes back to the shoreline where Peter's fishing. Instead of reprimanding Peter for his lack of faith, for his fear, he says, Peter, do you love me? And Peter says, of course, you know that I love you. And he asks the question again and again, 3 times actually, the same amount of times that Peter denied Jesus. And I think it's important. I think it's intentional from Jesus. And he says, then feed my sheep. And so Jesus restores Peter in such a beautiful way back to that place of, yeah, I know you love me. Come, do what I've called you to do, and don't quit. So I want to encourage you, if you're feeling insecure, if you're feeling worried or concerned, if you feel like you've failed, I want to encourage you, don't walk away from the Lord, but actually go back to his arms. Jesus wants to restore you. Jesus wants to bring you perspective. If you're feeling insecure, I just want to encourage you that your identity, your security is not found in what you can do. You're not qualified enough. Jesus didn't call the qualified people. He called you. And that is enough. If you will just follow him, even in the midst of your insecurities or the things that you don't feel like you're good at, Jesus is faithful, and that's what matters, that his grace is sufficient for you. And I also want to encourage you with another piece of encouragement that my mentor used to tell me when I was with him. He said, celebrate progress, not perfection. And I think that's so important. Celebrate progress. Celebrate how God is moving you. Paul says that I'm confident of this, that he who began a good work will finish it on to the day of completion. God is doing something in you. And just because you messed up, just because you didn't do something the right way, and you did wrong, doesn't mean that God is going to drop you and leave you there. If you look at the life of the disciples, even in spite of their shortcomings and their failures, Jesus was still with them, and he's still faithful to walk with you today. Jesus is still there. And he is faithful to bring you to that place of completion and maturity in Jesus. And the final thing I want to say is that if you're allowing your past to hinder you from the walk that God has called you to walk now, I want to encourage you to really dig into the grace of Jesus, the voice of God for you, and to know that God is actually restoring your life. If he has forgiven you, he has forgiven you once and for all. You don't need to live with the shame and the guilt of the past. Of course, there are consequences of things that we've done in the past. But when we come to Jesus and we ask forgiveness, he freely gives it to us. And if the challenge is that you can't forgive yourself, I just want to encourage you that grace, freedom, and forgiveness is a gift. Of course, you can't earn it, but God is faithful to restore. So everybody, I hope this bless you. And I would love to hear in the comments, what is one verse that really sticks out to you, that really has encouraged you in a difficult time? I'd love to hear that. and dialogue with you. And if you have any questions, you want to share your own perspective on this, I'd love to hear as well. But thanks so much for listening, and I will see you in the next video. See you later. Bye-bye.